Thank you for joining me on today's QuickBooks Enterprise webinar. My name is Kathryn Butts. I'm a senior consultant at Fourlane, and today I'll be discussing user rights and roles in QuickBooks Enterprise. Today's topic of user rights and roles can seem like a confusing topic in QuickBooks Enterprise, especially if you're new to the product. In today's webinar, we'll review how to identify how many users your license has. We'll review some of the major default roles in QuickBooks and how to customize a role, also assigning roles to users or modifying a role. Let's begin our discussion by identifying how many user seats we have in our license. If you click either the F2 key on your keyboard, or if that doesn't work, Control and then 1, you'll see the product information screen pop up. This screen will contain the number of user licenses that you have. I like to think that the best way to understand user licenses is to think of them like a kitchen table. If you have a 5-user license, that means that you have 5 chairs around your table and up to 5 friends can eat dinner together. If you have a 10-user license, you can have 10 people eat together. In order to invite these people over for dinner, you need to have your file operating in multi-user mode. That door is open. Come on in and have a seat. If you prefer to dine alone, or if you just need to take care of some important business in your file, like updating preferences or doing things like changing item mapping, you need to switch into single user mode. Just remember to switch back into multi-user mode so your team can log back in. The best practice is to assign each user in your company file their own unique username. This means that any actions they take in QuickBooks will be assigned to that unique username. And this will make identifying who did what in your audit trail much easier should that need ever arise. I never recommend sharing usernames, even for people who only log in rarely or even share a workstation. Now let's log into QuickBooks and begin looking at some of the default roles in QuickBooks. This is often a very eye-opening and lengthy meeting that I have with my clients, helping them to design their QuickBooks file. We have to think about all the people that will have access to the file, what tasks or permissions we'll need, and to think through any areas specifically that we don't want them to be able to see. And this can seem like a lot, but don't worry. Like most things in QuickBooks, if we don't get it right the first time, we can change it. I'm going to go to Company, and then Users, and then Set Up Users and Roles. And this is where we'll spend the majority of our time for the rest of the webinar. In order to set up a new user, I do need to be logged in as the admin. On the first tab, we're going to see our users. These are the people that have a username and role set up to access the file. You can see my admin, and then Kathryn has the role assigned of sales. On the second tab, we have the role list, and we're going to start by looking at what is contained within the role list. Roles are a series of permissions assigned to a QuickBooks users. QuickBooks users can have more than one role assigned. You can layer them together. Roles can be customized, or you can use or modify one of the default roles. The roles define what someone with that role assignment will and will not have access to in the file. You don't have to build these from scratch, and there are a good selection of these default roles. The one we'll begin with is the most important, the admin role. This is your master or your power user for the file, and this person can do everything. This role is not editable. I recommend that you do not have a user logging in and using admin as their primary day-to-day username. I am always going to recommend that the admin username is protected and logged into only when the authorized person needs to do admin-only tasks like adding a user. For the day-to-day use of a user who does need that global access, I'm going to recommend another default role, which is full access. Full access by default, however, is not 100% access to all of QuickBooks features, so let's take a look at this role by clicking Edit. When looking at a role in QuickBooks, a full circle means full access. A circle that's half full or half empty means partial access. and a circle that's empty means no access. You'll see that the full access role isn't all full circles, but we can change that if we want that fully full experience. You'll also notice that the way that this menu is organized is very similar to the major menus in QuickBooks: accounting, banking, customers, employees, reports, time tracking, vendors. Let's click through some of these menus and see what is or is not turned off for the full access user. And I am typically going to recommend that a full access user is granted permission to all features, because anybody on my team with full access are my most trusted of all staff members. So I usually fill in these empty circles. If you'll notice in the accounting menu, kind of these sub menus here, accounting tools by default is not turned on. Accounting tools is things like the ability to use the reclassify tool or the fix unapplied customer or vendor payments tools. These can be really helpful, so I do want that to be a full access. You'll notice under banking, we have all of those circles filled in. People would have access to all of our banking tasks, as well as all of our centers. In the company menu, I have never understood why the full access role does not by default have access to the bill tracker and the income tracker, as I think those are really cool dashboards to have, as well as the insights on the home page. It may also be appropriate for your business, depending on your kind of setup and accounting controls, to allow this full access user to be the one that sets closing dates and passwords. So if that's the appropriate action, you can mark that as full as well. Under customers and receivables, full access has ability to do everything within these tasks, including deleting, printing, creating, and modifying. The same is going to be true for employees and payroll if you are running payroll in QuickBooks. The file, some people may choose not to let their full access users do any import or export of, for example, IIF files. They may not have permission to clean up the data or access QBAR reports. But again, I think that if you have a full user that you want to have admin-like rights, you do want all of those circles to be filled in. Lists, of course, this person would have access to be able to do everything within our list environment, including creating, modifying, and deleting. Reports, you are going to notice that this custom transaction report has a circle that's not filled in. That's because the custom transaction detail is a higher level of information than the custom transaction detail limited. So it is okay that both of those circles aren't checked. All the rest of our reports have access. Time tracking, again, may or may not be something that you use within your file, but those options are here, as well as the vendors and payables. Another user that I want to talk to you about on a default user is the external accountant. Again, this is a default role that cannot be edited. But if your CPA or bookkeeper is logging into the books, even if it's only once a year at tax time, I highly recommend that you set them up with their own login with external accountant as their role. It's best to avoid giving these people admin for their routine work or letting them log in as another user for audit trail purposes. Now let's dive into a common role. Let's dive into the sales role. Sales, think of this as something like a sales rep. This person's going to need to be able to access certain features of QuickBooks relating to customers and sales transactions, and then a lot of features they're not going to need access to. So let's see what this default role will contain. Again, I'm highlighting the sales here, and I'm going to hit edit. Now, right off the bat, you're going to notice that this role has a description. It says this role is designed for your sales staff members who need access to sales orders, sales receipts, sales reports, estimates, and all information in the customer list. Seems like a pretty reasonable place to start, but let's dive in and take a look. You're going to notice that unlike the full access user, there's far fewer circles filled in here. I don't have any of those accounting tasks, so this person won't need access to my general journal, accounting tools, or my trial balance. This person in the sales role would not have the need to enter checks, reconcile bank accounts, make transfers, or use the bank feeds. That seems like that makes a lot of sense. In the centers, we do have a full circle here in the customer center, meaning that this person would be responsible for creating, modifying, and can print and view balances of customers. I want to take a moment here and just mention what this option where it says custom define record level access means. This is something that is kind of a hidden gem in QuickBooks. So imagine that you have, 5 sales reps and you have a really competitive sales department and you don't want salesperson A to be able to see anything about salesperson B's clients. They don't want to see their book of business. You can define this record level access to say, for example, I only want Kathryn to be able to see customers where Kathryn is listed as the sales rep. That's going to be the customer list that she gets to see. So the good thing is that, I'm not spying on my neighbor's work and seeing how many sales they've had come in or what their customer balances are. I'm only focused on my client list. The downside of that, though, is that if I go on vacation and I need my teammate to help support my clients, they're not necessarily going to be able to see who my customers are. So there are some pros and cons to that, but that is an option if you see that down here at the bottom. For the employee center, if payroll is something that you have in your file and you have an employee list, sometimes this is something we do want people to see. Other times we change this to none. Remember, we can modify these default roles here. In the company, again, it might be appropriate for the person in the sales role to be able to see the income tracker if I don't mind them seeing, AR aging or things like that, open invoices, open estimates, open sales orders. So that might be something that I choose to turn on. But this person is definitely not going to need the ability to set up budgets or forecasts within my file or set up bank feeds. For customers and receivables, you can see even for a sales role, we again don't have all of our circles filled in. We are mostly giving this person access to do certain transactions. They have full access to estimates, invoices, sales orders, sales receipts, and to use credit card numbers. However, depending on the role and the assignments of duties within my company file, it might be appropriate for me to go ahead and add in the ability to create a credit memo. This person might from time to time need the ability to create a receive payment or to be able to access statements. So there are some times where even within this default role, I may want to modify. Obviously, if I'm running QuickBooks Payroll, I need to be very cautious about anybody having access to payroll information. Those circles are going to remain unchecked. Again, in my file, this person is not going to be responsible for any sort of file maintenance, backups, or rebuilds, so I'm going to take that off. And then the list data, this person does not have access to the chart of accounts. They can view classes, most likely because they're going to need to be able to assign classes to transactions. For the item list, they can view, but they can't create a new item. That might be something worth discussing with your team. They can, for example, view my inventory site list. They can view my price rules, but again, they're not creating them. And on templates, again, this might be something to consider is I don't know that I need someone in a sales rep role having the ability to modify templates, but maybe that is something they need. And in the report section, this is always something that's very important. This person is mostly going to have access to sales reports. Now, if you look at this section here, and then you go look at the reports under your reports menu, you're going to see a lot of similarities to how these are organized. So there is some relationship between how your reports are organized and what reports someone would have access to. In this case, they would have access to like sales by customer summary, sales by item summary in detail, and those kinds of reports, but they're not going to have any access to customers and receivables. Again, that may be something that we modify depending on the setup of your company. Time tracking is not a concern for this role. And in vendors and payables, I'm not going to need this person in a sales team to have access to enter bill or pay bills. They can, however, view inventory transfers, may or may not be relevant for your company, but we're kind of limiting to what actions they can take in the company to only accounts receivable workflows here. Okay. Now, you can assign a single role like sales to multiple users. However, If all of these users don't require the same permission, changing the permission on the role will update everyone's access. If you need, for example, a role for a sales rep and a role for a sales manager, you can create a new separate role for the sales manager that might contain, for example, more access to reports or the ability to create a credit memo. One way that you can do this is by duplicating a role and then changing the name of it, and then adding those additional features. But this way, you start out with those same baseline permissions as the sales role, and you can just come in and add to it. Now, before I talk about another role, I want to slightly caution you on the ability of team members to do certain tasks within QuickBooks. I am quite a stickler on accounting controls, and I tend to be very wary of team members deleting transactions. I prefer to leave this ability to only very senior members of my team. Therefore, when I'm reviewing a role that will be assigned to a sales rep, most likely I am not going to give that person the ability to delete an invoice or a receive payment or any other transaction. If they feel that is necessary, I think a discussion with their manager is a good thing. The same thing is true of setting up new accounts in your chart of accounts or setting up new items. If an item is set up incorrectly, it can result in transactions posting to the wrong account on the GL, something that can be really tricky to figure out later on. I tend to leave permissions to set up items to team members who have received the proper training on these tasks, and I am also very particular about who can enter in inventory adjustments. Inventory adjustments can be a cover-up for some really sloppy workflows and unfortunately can have a big impact on the financials if left unchecked. For that reason, once again, I tend to be very selective on who has the proper authority to create inventory adjustments. All of these permissions need to be considered very carefully when assigning roles to your QuickBooks users. To contrast with our sales role, let's look at the purchasing role so we can see what access they have. Remember, when we're designing our roles, we can modify these existing roles. So the purchasing role says it's designed for your purchasing staff members who need to access purchase orders and purchases reports. Makes a lot of sense, right? So very similar. We don't have any access to accounting or banking. This person is going to have more robust access within our customer center. They may also need to see some customer names too, so I'm okay with them seeing customer names. Within the company file, again, not very many options checked here. This person is not going to have a lot of big responsibilities within the file. Again, it might be necessary for me to set this person up with the bill tracker. That's something I might consider. This person does not have any access in the purchasing role to customers and receivables. They do not have any access to payroll. They're not doing anything of changing import or export or advanced reporting in the file. On the lists, however, they do have some slightly different permissions here. This role does have the ability to create new items. Again, kind of interesting. You might be thinking that if this person is in charge of purchasing and is creating purchase orders, if we need to order a new part, would that person be responsible for creating that item? If so, I'm going to want to make sure that this person has the proper training on how to do that and when. Again, this person has access to be able to access and create new inventory sites. That may or may not be correct for my company. That may be something that I consider maybe modifying or letting them only view that list. And under reports, this person has access to purchasing reports and inventory reports. So purchases is going to be things like open purchase order reports, and inventory is like my inventory stock status, inventory evaluation, so that this person can keep an eye on quantity on hand and any necessary open purchase orders that they need to review. They're not going to have access to any company and financial reports, no balance sheet or P&L, no customer or AR reports, just kind of staying in that purchasing realm. Nothing on time tracking. And then within vendors and payables, the only thing that they have full access to is purchase orders. Remember, I tend to caution against our team members having access to delete transactions. This person very well might be responsible for transferring inventory from site to site or bin to bin, so I might be okay with adding a create or modify ability here. And this purchasing team member very well might be the person who has the responsibility to receive inventory into the warehouse or to receive products that are ordered. So I might be okay if this person does have the ability to create an item receipt. However, this person won't need to enter bills or pay sales tax, so we're going to leave all of those circles empty. All right. Now, if you want to see what permission each of these default roles contain, you can click on the View Permissions button at the bottom of this window, and you can select the roles and hit Display. This can be very handy, especially if you're trying to design these user roles for a bunch of people at your company to see what these default roles already come with. And this can be a good way to be able to take this data and start customizing some roles. What do we really want this person to have? Or to be able to see what permissions might be kind of layered in if we were to add, for example, finance and banking. What's the difference between those? You can also take this and look at the users. So I can take a look at a user and see what permissions this person has access to. So if I'm curious what Kathryn has access to, I can see that permission access by user report here. Now let's go in and build a role from scratch. When creating a role from scratch, it might be tempting to name the role after the person who will be using it. So you end up with a role called Kathryn that Kathryn uses and a Bruce role for the Bruce user. But if Bruce leaves the company and Josh takes over, it would be kind of weird and confusing for Josh's role to now be called Bruce. For that reason, I tend to name my custom roles after job titles and not after people, but that is entirely your choice. Also depends a lot on the number of users and staff members you have in your company. So if I click New, and I'm going to set up a warehouse manager role, I'm going to think through what this person will have access to within their file. So again, I probably don't need much on accounting or banking. I am okay with this person being able to view customers, and I am going to give them full access on the vendor center. A warehouse manager is going to spend a lot of time looking at vendors. Within the company file, I am okay with this person being able to see my bill tracker. Probably nothing else here. On the customers and receivables side, I think I might be okay with this person being able to view sales orders. The reason why is because if they have a question about an order that a sales rep took and want to go back and look at that actual sales order, I want them to be able to do that without having to pester my sales team. Again, maybe I want to get that invoice in there as well. They're not going to need access to employees and payroll, and we're not going to leave any file responsibilities to them. I am okay with them having ability to view a lot of this data. Inventory site list. Now, a warehouse manager probably would be someone who would be creating inventory sites. A warehouse manager probably would be somebody who's creating items. And I know the delete here seems a little strange on items because we all know if that item has been used on a transaction, we can't delete it. This person probably won't be taking care of any other responsibilities, so I'm going to leave these blank for now. On reports, I feel pretty confident that this person would need access to inventory, purchasing, and probably some sales reports, so I'm going to turn those on. Time tracking, no. And then in the warehouse manager role, I am going to be okay with this person having the ability to adjust quantity on hand. I am going to have the ability to create build assemblies, to create, modify, and delete item receipts, and to be able to handle my purchase orders and inventory transfers. So between the purchasing role and my warehouse manager, I do have quite a bit of more power here on this warehouse manager role. Now that I've set up and created that new warehouse manager role, let's go in and set up a user to use that new role. So I'm going to click off of my role list and into my user list, and I'm going to hit new, and I'm going to set up my new person. Now in here, the next option here is what default password we want to give them. If you do not assign a password in this setup step, the Bruce user will be asked to create their own password the first time they log in. Otherwise, they're going to use that default. I'm going to go ahead and set up a password. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is to assign my role warehouse manager. And if I needed to, I can assign multiple roles to my person. When I am setting up usernames, most of the time I see that the username is a first name of the person who'll need access to the QuickBooks. So that's a good option there. Sometimes people do first initial, last name. That's up to you guys. And again, how many users you're going to have. I'm going to click OK here. And now I have Bruce. All right, so what I'm going to do next that I've set this up is I'm currently logged in as the admin. And I am going to close my company and log off, and I'm going to log back in as Bruce so we can see what those permissions look like in action. So instead of logging in as the admin now, I'm going to log in with that username and password that my boss just assigned. I'm going to click OK. Now, when I log in, remember, I don't have access to 100% of things going on in this file. So if I try to create a, oh, did I actually get in there? Oh, I can view sales orders. Yep, that's one of the things that I can do. Can I look at invoices? I can look at invoices. Can I create an estimate? No, I can't. I don't have the ability to view estimates. I can do purchase orders. But I can't, for example, come in and look at the balance sheet of my company. I can't come into banking and say transfer funds. I can't enter a bill. I don't have that ability, but I can receive an item receipt off of a purchase order. So within this user permission, I can see that there are certain things in here that I am and am not going to be able to do. Now, after creating these roles and assigning them out to your team, it's common for you as the admin to get a little pushback from people. Maybe they can't access something they think they need, or they have to pester their boss to do something like delete a bad sales order. There may be some adjusting that you need to do in these roles, but it's okay if once a week a supervisor has to email out a report only they have access to, or that your team member has to talk to their manager to delete that transaction. Remember, if you go in and modify that role, it will affect all users with the role, not just that one person. I know that was a lot to cover, so I want to thank you all for joining me to discuss user permissions and roles. There are a lot of layers to thinking through these permissions, especially if your kitchen table has a lot of seats and you'll have a lot of users working in your file. If you haven't done a review of your user roles and permissions lately, the beginning of the year is a great time to think about how you can improve your accounting controls for 2025. Thinking through these permissions and who can do what in your file is a complicated process, and Fourlane can help think through all the nuances of permissions in your file. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and please join me.